life is no thrill. It's worse than nil. So draw the right conclusion. Let them be still.
Welcome to episode number 95 of the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast, a podcast showcasing the wide range of perspectives and ideas throughout antinatalism as it exists today, through interviews with antinatalist and non-antinatalist thinkers and creators of all kinds. Now running 5 years strong, I'm your host, Amanda Sukenick, and today I'm speaking with long-term contributor to the antinatalist community, animal rights and antinatalist activist, and Peter Wetzel Zapffe aficionado, Tim Oseckas. Tim, welcome to the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast. It's an honor to have you on the show today.
Hi, Amanda, and thank you for inviting me to join you in the discussion on your podcast. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. Tim, we've known each other for like a long time. I mean, at least since 2012, I think.
Yeah,
but we've never really had a one-on-one chat. I've been meaning to invite you on the podcast for a really significantly long time now, like really since the beginning. And finally, we have our opportunity. Tim, you've been making important contributions to antinatalism for a long time now in a variety of different forms. You've been in the community a long time. You're a passionate vegan and animal rights activist. You are damn near a Zapffe aficionado expert at this point. It was because of you that I was connected with the wonderful Mr. Ryan Schowler, the translator of Zapfe's On the Tragic, who I interviewed earlier this year. You most recently you met David Benatar at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas, so I'd like to speak to you a little bit about that, perhaps towards the end. So Tim, let's talk about all of these things, but most importantly, first let's start off with the most basic of questions. Who is Tim Oseckas?
I love these questions. Okay, so I've been, I guess, probably the most important things about me, that I can see anyway, that I've been vegan for 21 years now, anti-natalist for definitely over a decade. I did early on decide not to have children, so I had a vasectomy when I was 30. That sort of started me on that pathway. I'm also a nurse. So I've been a nurse for 24 years. And looking back, I guess there's, the compassion that's driven me towards becoming vegan and anti-natalist is the same compassion that drove me towards wanting to be a nurse. So they're probably the main things about me that I guess I can talk about. Yeah.
And excellent things indeed. 21 years as a vegan. I'm coming up on almost 10 years as a vegan myself.
Well done.
Thank you. But 21 years is just exceptional. So congratulations on that. That's amazing. Tim, why are you, or are you not, although I know you are, an antinatalist?
Yeah, well, for me, it's definitely for ethical reasons. And looking around at the world, what I've witnessed, what I've experienced, has led me to that conclusion. And especially being a nurse, being exposed to what can and what does happen to human beings. And I guess it's also connected to veganism. So, vegans obviously opposed to humans breeding other animals to bring them into existence for their use. And in some ways, I see antinatalism the same way, that, humans are also animals, and us humans have a choice whether we bring those human animals into existence and for our own use and purposes as well. So that's another reason why I'm an antinatalist. And I guess there's some good misanthropic arguments there as well. I see the human species as a deeply troubled and complex species that causes a lot of problems for itself, but also for other species on the planet. So they're probably the main reasons. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot. You undoubtedly witness a lot of horror being a nurse. I mean, how do you psychologically deal with that? Like, what do you think that the horror that I witness in my own life, without getting into too much detail, I know that in some respects, antinatalism is a piece of the comfort that kind of gets me through the day, because I at least know, okay, the sentient beings that I would be capable of producing, I'm not producing, I'm saving them for that. And that is sort of yeah, it's a piece of comfort. It's a nice it's a nice thing that helps me go to sleep at night, at least knowing that I'm not contributing, and being vegan also, goes towards that. So what is that like for you?
I think you're right there too. It's having that focus on ways that you can actively try and reduce or prevent suffering. Um, so having that, I guess, it's a bit of a mission, right? A bit of a meaning, purpose that we can create for ourselves. And I guess in Zapfian terms, it's a bit of an anchor that we can use to sort of help drag us along through life and sort of try and help others along the way.
Tim, hearing you talk about Zapffe, and we'll talk a little bit in a bit about the recent video that you did, and just at other opportunities that I've heard you speak about Zapffe and other things. I mean, you seem to have a pretty extensive knowledge of philosophy, and I wonder, has that been part of your background, your educational background, or have you just studied philosophy on your own?
Yeah, so I often think about this, how it sort of got to that point, and I have been quite influenced by existentialist philosophy, and I came across that sort of earlier in my life. I think thinking back to probably the age of 10 when my grandfather died, I probably started asking questions then about, death and existence and meaning and purpose. And as a young teenager, I'd studied different religions, and including Buddhism as well. And I think as a young adult, I eventually came across existentialist philosophy. As an atheist, I think that's where I was led basically to try and make sense of human existence. And ever since then, I've just been, I guess along the way, just finding different philosophers, see what they've got to say, thinking about that a lot. So early on, just particularly Martin Heidegger and his concept of being thrown into existence and things like that, and just generally a lot of the other existentialist ideas, particularly the atheist existentialist, Jean-Paul Sartre as well. And then, of course, coming across Zapffe, which was probably, around early, 2010, 2012, something like that. I was actually into deep ecology at the time, so I discovered a book written about Norwegian philosophers on deep ecology, and there was a whole chapter on Zapffe in that particular book, and that was probably my first exposure not only to Zapffe but to the idea of antinatalism. Yeah.
So that book actually dealt with the subject of antinatalism. Do you remember the name of that particular book?
It had it's called Wisdom in the Open Air: The Norwegian Roots of Deep Ecology, and the chapter that included Zapffe had his essay "The Last Messiah." So that was the first time I'd come across that, and I just thought that was profoundly insightful and obviously a very deep existentialist essay. And that sort of led me to research further and come across eventually, David Benatar and other authors, and of course Andreas through his Planet Zapffe website.
Yeah. Which is, for those that don't know, that was one of the most amazing, websites on Zapffe. It was one of the earliest, probably one of the earliest antinatalist websites. The last time that I looked at it, it was down, or most of it was down, or something of that nature.
Yeah.
I hope he's put it back up, because that really is an extraordinary time capsule of a bygone era of online antinatalism. But that's an amazing history. And I mean, your history with Zapffe and kind of where it's led you is an incredible story in and of itself. And you've been an amazing sort of Zapffe activist in your own right. Like I was planning on saying this later on, but like any video anybody makes on the subject of Zapffe, like Tim is always in the comments, especially before the time that On the Tragic had been translated. You were really the one, out there, trying to get people to pay attention to it, and you continue to be, and that's a wonderful thing. I mean, as many people have said, there might very well be no better place to start one's antinatalism than on the tragic. It just sort of sums up antinatalism in such a beautiful, perfect kind of way. I will definitely return to Zapffe in a little bit, but
Yeah.
if I may ask, like, when did you said 21 years ago, but when did you become vegan? And when, how and why did your interest in animal rights begin?
Yeah. So I know as a teenager, I already stopped drinking cow's milk. I never liked cow's milk, so I started drinking soy back then. And then I think at the start of university, I was probably 19, 20. I'd already stopped eating animal flesh. I went through a period of that. And I don't even know back then if I identified it as anything. I just stopped doing it. And I think that was the influence of my exposure to Buddhist philosophy and the precepts against killing, in Buddhism, and the focus on compassion. So that was probably the earliest start there. And then probably, 2023, I'd been reading probably, I think it was another Buddhist text talking about animal liberation. So I started exploring what that term meant. Came across some videos. I think one of them was called Meet Your Meat. Yeah. So from there, it was pretty much overnight. I think the seed was planted long ago. I'd never felt comfortable even as a child at home eating animal flesh and things like that. I always felt there was something a bit wrong about that, off-putting. So I think it was an easy transition for me. I wasn't never very attached to that, and I said, yeah, it's like before that, the compassion was there already. So I think it was just an easy thing to go, this is wrong, and there's a way. I don't have to support this. So it's pretty much like an overnight thing from that point. Yeah.
I wish that was my story. I had a much more difficult time letting, as somebody with a history of eating disorder, major food addiction. It was really hard for me to stop. I had all the right philosophy down, but just couldn't put the actions to it. So brilliant. I'm always extremely inspired to hear people speak that had such an easy transition. And your path towards that, really fascinating. Do you still consider yourself a Buddhist, and what are your thoughts on that intersection between Buddhism and antinatalism?
These days, I probably wouldn't call myself a Buddhist, but I'm definitely influenced by more secular understandings of Buddhism. So, removing the religious elements from Buddhism, so just mainly focus on the ethical and psychological aspects of I guess what essentially was originally a movement. And I guess over time, as people do, things get interpreted, misinterpreted, reinterpreted. So you get different denominations, different understandings, different cultural responses to different movements and ideas. And I think fundamentally, like what I'm attracted to with Buddhism is the root term Bud, to awaken. And I think that's helps explain, what it is that we go through when we start questioning our indoctrination and looking around at our cultures and our societies and starting to question those things. It is awakening from essentially a form of sleep, like a type of indoctrination. So that's what I find attractive. And also I found benefit over the years from meditation. I haven't consistently done that, but I do notice that when I'm consistently meditating, that I find that I'm less reactive to situations. So that's been definitely helpful. And there's other aspects of Buddhism too, like there's some fundamentally, you've probably read this yourself, particularly I think Ligotti talks about that in Conspiracy Against the Human Race, the pessimism that's there fundamentally in Buddhism, that life is suffering. So, if the Buddha was an actual person, he seemed to have had this fundamental insight that life is suffering. And then there's different interpretations of the Four Noble Truths that stem from that. And then I think, it's basically that's what sort of kept me interested in Buddhism. And then I guess like most things. Buddhism is another response to our existential situation. And it can, I guess it just helps in some ways. Some people cope with existence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much for your insight into that. I mean, my arrival at antinatalism had so much to do with atheism. And that's sort of been it's been difficult for me sometimes to like move past quite that tunnel vision, but it is really interesting and very valuable to hear how different religions have also got people to that antinatal point, or how it's contributed, through Buddhism, through Christianity, through different world religions. It's still amazingly so actually can be a path towards antinatalism, which is surprising, coming from an atheist perspective. But yeah, it helps to hear those details.
Yeah, well,
sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I was going to say, you're probably familiar with this book, Ken Coates or Ramesh Mishra, so Anti-natalism. He talked about obviously Buddhism in his book, and how, and I've thought about this a lot too. And because Buddhism does identify suffering as a problem, and they talk about becoming enlightened to stop the cycle of birth and death. And it's so obvious that antinatalism is that solution. It's so clear that if you want to stop that cycle, you stop the cycle. You don't keep it going. So to me, I guess antinatalism in a way is a type of awakening to that.
Yeah, I think. Well, I'm glad you brought up Ken Coates, the brilliant, from Buddhism to Benatar. That book interestingly missed so many sort of obvious pieces of antinatalist history, but the pieces that it did cover, I think he did a really brilliant job, and that was a very important work. I would love to see more contemporary Buddhists sort of challenged with antinatalism, because I agree with you. It seems to be sort of, there's something very deeply antinatal ingrained within the philosophy of Buddhism, but it seems to be sort of often missed outside of us, outside of those with an antinatalist predilection. Yeah. So thank you for that, Tim. That's great. Can you tell me? There's a video of you on the internet speaking at the Animal Justice Party, which is really fascinating, and I was just kind of wondering if you would mind speaking about that a little bit.
Yeah, I guess so. After nearly almost a decade of animal activism, I decided to give politics a bit of a go. So I was a candidate in the state election here in 2022, I think it was. And essentially, I saw that as a platform, as a way to try and talk about and bring other animals into politics, because obviously they're often ignored. And I guess the purpose of the Animal Justice Party is to try and have that conversation and get people thinking about other animals. Obviously, they can't vote, so what we do and the actions we take and who we vote for matters to them as well. So I wanted to just bring that focus into the political realm there, and it was a good opportunity to speak at a few public forums and try and express the fundamental, I guess, speciesism, human supremacism, all that kind of stuff that's driving non-veganism and how we treat other animals. So and it was you're filling in a little gap there on the electoral ballot as well. So you're giving people another option, something else to think about. And I think I ended up with over 700 votes. So it's only a small amount, but it was the first state election we had where we had candidates in every single seat. So someone had the option to choose someone from that party in every single electorate, which was good.
I mean, good on you for putting yourself out there in that kind of capacity. I mean, 700. Hey, it's more votes than I would get. Certainly,
It's
trying
stressful.
to do the same thing. Oh, I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine. Do you think that you would try such a thing again at some point?
That's something, I've considered, but I don't know. I guess it's difficult because I realized during that campaign how corrupt politics is, and it was sort of quite um, what's the word, uh, disillusioning, I guess, or just reinforcing things about politics for me in a way. So in a way, I'm kind of thinking that to make more progress there, perhaps it is probably better maybe to focus on grassroots, try and get more people, to think about their behaviour and their beliefs, and that way try and get the voters to shift a little bit more that way. But yeah, so I don't know. I'm still thinking about that. Yeah.
I wouldn't blame you if it was a one time
Yeah.
dip in the politics pool.
Yeah.
But massive respect to you for even considering going down that route and just kind of seeing how it panned out. But it must have been you from other interviews that you've done, which we'll speak about later. You have said that you identify as an anarchist, so it must have been particularly interesting, sort of making that leap into politics. I am
Yeah.
curious, like, hear your thoughts on that. But also, if you see what your thoughts are on the confluence or not between antinatalism and anarchism.
Yeah. Well, I guess in terms of entering politics, yeah, obviously that I do identify as an anarchist, and I think there are big problems with having a state and nations and things like that, governments. But at the same time, we have a world of over 8 billion people now, and I'm not sure whether anarchism would actually work, particularly when you look at how democracy is going so far. So trying to get a lot of people to agree on one thing, I think, is impossible. So it's in having these ideals at the same time, a bit pragmatic as well. So I try and look at ways of trying to minimize harm, try and minimize damage. So I try and find practical and pragmatic ways as well to try and achieve some ways of reducing and preventing suffering. So I think politics obviously one way, activism, other forms of activism is another way. So it's just trying to explore different ways to try and do that.
100%. And
Mm.
I've called you an antinatalist activist a couple of times already in this interview. But
Mm.
I do ordinarily try to be careful about using that label because people have different feelings about that. I mean, do you consider yourself an antinatalist activist?
Yeah, I have been. Not in the sense of being out on the streets and promoting it that way. But yeah, in terms of, I guess, early on in my activism, when I was, particularly when I was on Facebook, haven't been on Facebook now for, I don't know, 4 years or something like that. So I was fairly active at that time, definitely trying to promote anti-natalism, try and convince people to think about that. And I don't know if I was that successful. I know some people, some of my friends now are sort of maybe coming around to it and can see the reasons behind that. Um, yeah, I think, and just going back to the anarchism and anti-natalism thing too. I guess I guess ultimately it's about sort of freedom from authority, freedom from a hierarchy, things like that. And I guess when you bring someone into the world, you're already bringing them into all those hierarchies and those systems of oppression and domination, control. So, and online, there's certainly, I've seen anarchist arguments for antinatalism as well. Just the whole, you know, obviously being parent is a type of hierarchy as well. Adultocracy and things like that. Children
100%.
have experience of oppression and control. So I guess that's one sort of slant on that.
And I'm pretty sure Facebook is how I first came in contact with you because you were
Yeah.
very, very, very passionate about animal rights, about antinatalism, and trying to get people to understand and making arguments. And I know that was a very frustrating, as Facebook often is. I know that was a very frustrating experience, for you. And at that time, antinatalist Facebook was kind of hopping. I mean, it was like there was a lot of activity on Facebook. Do you mind, like, going back to 2012, up and really a couple of those years, I would say up until maybe 2016, maybe a little bit past that. Do you mind, like, what was that time like on Facebook? I mean, because there were so many different Facebook groups. Which ones were you active in? What do you remember from antinatalism from those years?
Yeah, well, I do remember the main group, Anti-natalist Facebook group. That was very active. Lots of discussions, a lot of sometimes conflict and disagreement there. Um, so, particularly amongst those who opposed, veganism, that was a big conflict in that group in particular. People who sort of um, couldn't see the connection or refused to because of their human supremacism and attachment to speciesism and the benefits they get from that, of course. So I remember that was one big discussion. And then, of course, there was people who would bring up, who claimed to be antinatalists but also opposed to abortion. That was also an interesting discussion. I think that's ongoing there. So I guess, at times, it was, I guess, like any sort of conversation or any sort of belief. There's always going to be conflict because people aren't always going to agree, and we all have different biases, and we have different arguments, and sometimes they're not so well formed, or even though we think we're on the right path, and sometimes we can't explain it well, and so that gets a bit difficult. So it does take time and patience to try and convey ideas and have discussions, and that can be quite frustrating at times. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, well, I mean, but thank goodness for people like you who were willing to do it. And those were amazing years. I'm glad I got to experience some of that pushback and got to see so much of that. It's an amazing kind of international spectrum of antinatalism that exists on Facebook. I mean, so many different, every little place in the world you can think of, there's some sort of antinatalist Facebook group or page dedicated to it. But there's huge attrition. So many of those groups and pages, they're just dead. They're just left to kind of languish. And it's interesting how since that time things have sort of moved on to other platforms. Probably Reddit now is like where most of the discussion is. And it's just, I mean, from my perspective, began on YouTube, then sort of YouTube sort of like, it's when I say began, I mean in terms of social media platforms, YouTube was it as far as antinatalism goes. Then it was Facebook, and now it's Reddit, and who knows where it's going from there. So it's hard to find somebody that kind of has seen that course, that's been around these circles for so long. So it's really interesting to get your perspective on it.
I think one of the big risks and one of the big problems is, obviously anyone who's involved in activism is burnout. When you're putting that much time and effort and emotional energy into something, and it does get frustrating. That can easily lead to burnout. I think a lot of people have experienced that, including myself and some of the other people who were quite active at the time. So that's I think a few people have taken a bit of a back seat but you've kept going. You're there still at the front line trying to.
I'm a glutton for punishment. What can I say? Amongst other things. But no, it's true. I mean, the vast majority of those that have been very active over the course of, because I started in 2010, almost 2025 now. Barely anybody, has kept going that long. But I get it, because not only is it difficult to sort of maintain that level of activism, but the disagreements in antinatalism are so unbelievably significant. And I mean, without meaning to stir up some good old drama, like that particular Facebook group that you that you mentioned. I mean, now you're not allowed to talk about veganism. You're not allowed to talk about ethalism. You're not allowed to talk about extinctionism.
Really?
You're not allowed to talk about transhumanism. You're not, so it's like, it's amazing how things have become, and that may have kind of contributed to Facebook no longer sort of being the hub of antinatalism, because if you just if you don't allow antinatalism to be antinatalism and to venture off into these different pieces of itself, or at least have the argument about whether those pieces of itself are pieces of itself, it's just too much surgery to be sustainable, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously, like, you talked about YouTube, but I think podcasts is certainly something that's a little bit bigger now too, where people are actually having conversations and talking that way. I think that's a good sort of process, that people can have those discussions and not be disrupted or distracted by all this other stuff going on in the background, and just focus. And clearly there's still books being published, including your book as well. So that kind of stuff still, the idea is still spreading, it's still getting out there, and so that's good to see too.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Tim. Thanks so much for mentioning the book. But yeah, no, I mean, the landscape has changed. I mean, now it's like there's starting to be documentaries on antinatalism. There's articles by journalists much more often, and
Yeah.
it's just such a different world that this thing is existing in than what was around when we first started, where it really was this incredibly obscure. It really was like 5 to 10 of us running around obscure places on the internet. And now I don't know what the numbers actually are. There's been so little actual statistical work done on antinatalism and the movement side of it, but it's a totally different ballgame, and it's great to see.
Yeah, well, yeah, you mentioned my attendance at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. So that was quite interesting to see David Benatar there presenting on, antinatalism. There was a room of, 200 to 300 people there in that forum listening to him there speak about, the case for not having children. So it's kind of that's pretty good that it's finally reached that point where someone like David could speak in a forum like that, that's fairly well known in Sydney, and his particular presentation was well attended. He filled the room, so it was quite good. Yeah, and one thing about David's presentation, he was quite lively and animated, and used a lot of humor. So I think that sort of helped a lot of people open up to the idea. Like at the start of the presentation, it's like, everyone raise your hand. Who's an antinatalist? Just a few hands went up. And who's on the fence? A few more went up. And at the end of the presentation, some of those people who were on the fence, they actually shifted towards, opening up towards antinatalism. So, that kind of thing, a room full of 300 people, that did have an impact. And then at the end of the presentation, they had like book sales, and his pile of books just shrunk. So people did actually go and buy some of his books after that event.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, and he got some local media. He was in that on the ABC, had an interview with local ABC podcast. He was in the local one of the local papers here as well. So it did get a little bit of discussion in the media as well. So David's been doing a lot of work. He's continuing to get interviews. So that's great as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I did see some of that, and yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. Ethan, I just want to mention Ethan Metha. I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong. He also was there, and he did a video on this on the presentation. I'll link that below because it's an excellent video. I just want to shout that out.
Yeah, I think I saw that.
Yeah, it was fantastic. So the name of David's presentation was The Case for Not Having Children, if I'm not mistaken. Outside of the details that you mentioned, I mean, what else can you tell me about the presentation? Like, I heard he used like a lot of memes, and the humor around it was nice to hear about that.
It did. Yeah, it was very, very lively, and he used a lot of humor. So I think that's a great way to convey these sort of ideas, and you could just see people relax a bit more and sort of start to open up to it, and you could obviously see at the end of the presentation too that more people were sort of opening up to the idea. It was definitely a great opportunity, I think, obviously for David, but also just for antinatalism to sort of get out there a little bit more, and have that kind of exposure. Yeah.
Amazing. And was this the first time that you had got to see David speak? Were you, I'm probably
Yeah.
remembering wrong, but were you in attendance at the Anti-natalism Under Fire conference?
No, I didn't know about that, and
Okay.
I think that was that in Prague?
That was in Prague, I think in 2017.
Yeah, yeah. No, I didn't. I definitely didn't go to that, but this is the first time I've got to see David and meet him as well. So that was quite a great experience.
I mean, yeah, I completely remembered wrong, so I apologize for that. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
what can you tell me about having met him? Did you get to ask Professor Benatar some questions?
Um, yeah, I sort of didn't get too much time to ask him many questions, um, but yeah, he did say he's read the Anti-natalist magazine, so that's yeah. We got to talk a little bit about Zapffe as well. So obviously, he wrote a foreword for Ryan's translation. Um, yeah, so that was good, and he also he did do a. He was involved in another presentation on protesting as well. That's, I guess, another area
Really?
that was an interesting in. So, yeah, the impact of protesting. So, um, how far basically do you go? What are the rights of protesters compared to the rights of those who are impacted by protesting? That was a fairly good discussion as well.
Oh, that's phenomenal. I hadn't realized that he had been involved in two different lectures during that event.
Yeah,
Excellent. Excellent.
yeah. I think, and that connects to his one of his most recent books about the fall of the University of Cape Town. I don't know if
Oh,
you're
of
familiar.
course. Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
the
yes,
protesting that
absolutely.
was happening there, and so I think, yeah, obviously that was it's obviously an interest of David's as well.
Brilliant. Well, I'm so glad that you got to see him, to meet him. I mean, I hope that more, forward-facing antinatalism becomes, more and more of a thing as time goes on. He does more public lectures. Other antinatalist philosophers do more public events, lectures, and stuff like that. It's just, it's wonderful to see.
Mm.
And we'll talk a little bit about the magazine in a second, because yeah, it's amazing that Professor Benatar remembered you from issue, well, 1 or 2, well, actually all 4 of them. You were involved in all 4 of them, so that's great that he remembered you from there. I was curious though, Tim,
Mm.
what do you think about the term vegan antinatalism? Because that's like sort of a separate antinatalist identity that's kind of like emerged over the last couple of years, and it
Mhm.
sort of more explicitly, makes the connection between animals and antinatalism
Yeah.
solidified, as
Mhm.
an antinatalist identity. But do you think it's necessary? Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Yeah. Any thoughts you might have on that?
Mm. Yeah, it would be nice just to talk about antinatalism, but I guess as we mentioned just before, there is that sort of human supremacism, speciesism that's still there. Some people are focused on humans, obviously see humans as procreation is a problem for humans only, and not looking at the suffering experienced by other animals. So I can see why people have started, using that term or to try and bring a focus onto other animals, because like most things, it's ends up being human focused. But I guess it's trying to challenge, yeah, I guess that fundamental speciesism that leads most people to ignore other animals being born, for human use, for to consume, to wear, to use for sports and science and that kind of stuff. So I think it's a good thing, and hopefully at some point, maybe it's a term we don't have to use. I guess that's the same with veganism. Hopefully it just becomes normal at some point, but I guess we're a long way away from that. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think it's good to bring those two movements and ideas together. To also to maybe bring those who are antinatalists across to veganism, those who are vegans across to antinatalism. I think there's some good cross pollination going on there, and I think it will help build the movement if those two ideas can sort of come together and grow together.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, on one hand, I almost think of it as a bit unnecessary because, I mean, for
Yeah.
me, antinatalism has always encompassed all of sentient life. But at the
Mhm.
same time, identity is very important to people, and labels are a difficult matter altogether. And maybe it has done some important bridge building for some folks. And so if that's come out of it, then I think it's very valuable. What do you think though about, because there are some arguments about how, okay, we're sentiocentric there's sentiocentric antinatalism, there's anthropocentric antinatalism, but sentiocentric antinatalism that extends to wild animals is going too far. The only kind of animals that really should be encompassed in antinatalism are those that we create. So animals created through factory farming, though that's procreation that is our fault, so to speak. They're here because of us.
Yeah.
But wild animals, that's not antinatalism because they're just caught up in the cycle of nature, and that's not really our place. What do you think about that?
Mm. So I can definitely see the argument for obviously, yeah, other animals in living in free nature to not be born because they clearly suffer and die as well. So there's certainly an argument there to think about that and the suffering that goes on, and to think that it would be better if they weren't born. Um, and I do think about this, and I guess there's complexity there in terms of ecosystems and biodiversity. So I guess when you look at sort of if we were to intervene in some way, for example, mass contraception or something like that, uh, there may be consequences we don't really understand that would impact on and potentially cause more suffering for some species if we were to focus on, some species not procreating. For example, like insects and the role they play, birds, reptile, like everything's got. So it gets a bit complicated. I think it's a lot easier if you were to just eliminate humans from the equation because we don't seem to have any benefit to any kind of ecosystem. If we were to disappear, like things would probably improve in some ways, but then particularly like obviously our breeding of other animals. But yeah, I think it can be. I think it's complex in trying to go to that level of intervening in nature that way. It's I can just see
Complex
the
is
argument.
complex is
Yeah,
the only word for it, for sure. I didn't mean to interrupt
yeah,
you though. Go ahead, please. Forgive me.
yeah. So I think if all it would be, I guess, in some ways better if somehow all life just went extinct all at once. You know, but in terms of humans intervening, because I know there's some people who call themselves antinatalists say we should keep procreating, we'll make creating humans so that we can eventually eliminate other species. You know what I mean? So that kind of defeats the purpose of antinatalism from a human perspective. You're using another human for a purpose and a cause that that person hasn't chosen, and puts them in a situation where they're exposed to suffering and death as well. So I find that problematic.
Well,
Um,
on one hand, sorry, let me interrupt you there. I
yeah,
apologize though for
yeah,
interrupting you. But
that's
let,
all
let
good.
me let me just as a point of slight devil's advocate,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
if we look at say, sort of Benatarianism
mm,
and his chapter on extinction and his
mm,
he does recommend phased extinction.
mm,
So because you can't stop procreation full stop, it would be horrific if
mm,
there was some totalitarian regime that said, okay, no more procreation. Yes, it would get very nasty. Um, so considering that, like, if human beings chose the gradual extinction of the human race, would it not be necessarily possible? Oh well, possible is a difficult question, but I'm just saying
mm.
that could possibly entail a sort of engineered approach to ending nature while we're still here. So I sort of feel like
Yeah,
maybe that utility of keeping human beings around in the interest of ending nature while that seems sort of counterintuitive to antinatalism, because we wish for no births, the path towards extinction, which would include some procreation under sort of a phased extinctionist program, let's say, for lack of a better word, that would probably be pretty Benatarian. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I think about my own choice not to, have children, and I still wouldn't want to bring another person into existence for that purpose, given what I know about human existence and this idea that this may happen at some point in the future. Like the way the world's going now, humans might create extinction through climate change and things like that. So that's probably the most likely outcome, that there might be some kind of great extinction from what humans are doing in that way. So not a voluntary extinction, but an involuntary one. So yeah, I personally couldn't justify bringing another human into existence to for some planned future phased extinction, which could be generations away. Like in that time, there's still going to be a lot of humans born, a lot of other animals as well. So I think obviously, and this probably is a long way off too. If ever going to happen, is obviously veganism would help a lot too, to stop breeding those billions of animals every year, and killing those trillions of sea animals like fish every year. That would yeah. So I think it's definitely a complex discussion and idea.
100%. Now, and let me just say, I mean, I would, as much as I would love to see a voluntary extinctionism happen, I also think that these are purely hypotheticals. I mean, it's an interesting debate because I feel like sometimes the consequences of that sort of Benatarian proposal of phased extinction is not really something that a lot of antinatalists tend to contend with, because it does mean allowing some birth. Since Benatarianism is sentiocentric, then the possibility of a sort of an engineered intervention into nature probably follows, or could follow, again in very hypothetical terms. So it's
and I guess with something like phased extinction, that would be something that everyone would have to agree upon as well. And the idea of antinatalism leading to extinction, well, I guess, that would have to be accepted by the majority of people. So that'd be a lot of work to get people to that point. And maybe it might happen as the world gets destroyed further. I think more people are starting to go, well, I really don't want to bring someone into this. So I don't know. I think the way the world's going, more people will start to think about antinatalism in that way. Yeah.
I think this leads us perfectly into a bit of a discussion on your favorite antinatalist subject, if I may say, which is Zapffe, or one of your most favorite conversations. Because I think he just sort of had it all, right? Like The Last Messiah. Okay, we're phased extinction aside. I mean, there is a perfectly beautiful sort of extinctionist message in there, and there's some argument, I know, amongst antinatalists about this, but to me anyway, his words speak towards a kind of sentiocentric antinatalism just beautifully. I mean, his acknowledgement of the suffering of nature and of animals, it just spells out contemporary and what antinatalism would become so many decades later, in this exceptionally beautiful fashion. I wonder what your thoughts are on that. I mean, do you find that Zapf's expression of antinatalism is sentiocentric, anthropocentric?
Because I've heard people sort of argue that his antinatalism is sort of anthropocentric, that he was focused on, obviously, humans not procreating and becoming extinct that way. But like you say, right at the beginning of the essay, he talks about the brotherhood of suffering between everything alive, and it's the archer at the waterhole who is overwhelmed by that suffering, who ends up dying. It's hard to know whether he dies from starvation or whether he kills himself. It doesn't, you can only really sort of guess at what led to his death there at the waterhole. But clearly, yeah, that created problems for the archer, and yeah, it's, I guess, and then right at the end, the last Messiah obviously is a descendant from the archer, so that person must have obviously procreated at some point for that line to continue on.
Good point. I had never thought about that, but
Yeah,
that's a possibility for sure.
yeah, yeah, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier too, is being in the world and seeing what goes on here, the suffering and the uh, enormity of the whole scale of the suffering. It's can be quite overwhelming, and I guess that's one good reason why we have uh, anti-natalism. And I think Zapf personally, like from what I can tell in his own life, he certainly wasn't even didn't even appear to even be a vegetarian. It's hard to know whether he had any discussions about that, whether if he'd come across the idea of veganism, whether he would have been open to that. I know in some ways he was progressive, in other ways he was quite conservative, with his focus on nationalism and things like that, and um, living in nature. But I know there are stories too about when he was involved in hunting a polar bear, and after I think he was involved in killing a polar bear. After that, he decided to not hunt anymore. So he certainly had some sympathy there. Well, particularly for maybe that animal and other wild animals in terms of hunting. But I don't think he's perhaps shifted that towards his own diet and the impact that would have on other animals bred by humans. But yeah, I think he certainly had some sympathy there.
Speaking with Ryan, which again was very much you set that up for sure. I still can't believe Ryan only lives a couple of doors away, really, which is incredible. But yeah, I mean, it's been an incredible year for those that love Zappa, because the incredible, I mean, his magnum opus on the tragic was this for those that don't know, was this piece of antinatalist history that was, just considered to be a lost class. Not lost in this. I mean, obviously, we still had the original Norwegian version, but I think in some respects, I mean, a piece of the reason why we eventually got this was because you so tenaciously, kept putting it into people's brains that, like, we need this. You know what I mean? You were such a force of getting people to pay attention to this and want this. And that to me is it alone is a very important piece of anti-natalist activism that you've done. Uh,
Hmm.
are you fluent in Norwegian? Like, had you read the original? Have you read a lot of other pieces of Zappa's work that has not yet been translated?
So I started learning Norwegian, um, but I haven't continued. I'm sort of back at the point now. I'm finding some time to start going through and doing that again, because I have got Zapffe. His whole collected works is about 10 books, so there's plenty there to still work. And I know Ryan's working on translating some more of his work. But now I'm just thinking. There's a recent book that's come out about Zapffe by Dago Hessen. He's pretty much like an expert on Zapffe in Norway. And the good thing about these books now is that we can use Google Translate to read them. So
That's a good point.
Google Translate on my phone. It's modern Norwegian. It's not sort of in the older style that Zapffe wrote in, so it does translate pretty well. So you can, scan a page in the book and then read it. So we have access now. So in some ways, that's probably now that I can do that, it's probably stopped me from continuing to learn Norwegian because I don't have to anymore in a way. Um, yeah, so and then there's a lot of other books out there. There's books in Danish, recent book about Zapffe as well, looking at different aspects. There's his biography called Naken under Kosmos, Naked Under the Cosmos, written by Jürgen Haver in some time ago, probably 20, 30 years ago. And you can read that now as well with Google Translate. So you can find out and learn a lot more about Zapffe and his ideas, and including the recent book by Dag Hessen. He he's he doesn't call himself a Zapfian. He's critical of Zapffe, particularly his idea of the tragic, and but I think he admires Zapffe for his early focus on conservation and ecology, like influenced some of those early deep ecologists in Norway. So I think you can appreciate that, and also Zapfe's understanding of how humans have evolved with this overthinking mind that creates problems for us. Yeah, I think he appreciates that in some way too, but he doesn't he doesn't agree with anti-natalism. Yeah.
Well, most don't, but still, incredible scholarly work, and technology has saved you a lot of effort. It seems
Yeah.
in having to learn Norwegian, and yeah, of course, as we know, Zapffe wrote in a very particularly difficult form of Norwegian.
Mm.
So there's that. What do you think of Ryan's incredible effort?
I think he's done a great job with the translation.
Yeah.
And yeah, I have to be honest too, like with the book itself, it's a very academic text, so it does take a lot of focus and concentration to get through the work. So I'll probably have to read that again to yeah, make more sense of it. And there's little sections in there that do come from the earlier, the Last Messiah, and I guess he elaborates on a lot more, but. There's not a huge focus on antinatalism. It's just more about describing the tragic nature of existence that I guess eventually leads to antinatalism. If you take that idea of the tragic seriously, yeah.
Yeah, so I have I've read parts of it by now. It is very dense. I agree with you. It's like
Yeah,
it
it's
does
dense
say,
text.
but it was his dissertation, so so that does make sense. But I think that's one of the most wonderful things that's kind of come out of the translation is like, there was sort of this idea about this book previously that, okay, well, it's only got like a couple of lines that are, anti-natalist. But I think what's been revealed is that no, this book like details so much more of his background thinking that would get one, or that got him to an understanding of antinatalism, and that's even more valuable than just like the couple of like very explicit lines that were understood to be antinatalist previously.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, Ryan did an incredible job. Thank you again for putting us in contact. I absolutely love doing that interview with him, and I learned so much. Like I said in that interview, Zapffe is kind of this person that, like, obviously I'd read The Last Messiah, but it's like there wasn't a whole lot of ways in to learning about, for somebody who only speaks English, didn't have a lot of access. It was a wonderful way of learning about his work. You recently did an incredible video for the Existential Society of Melbourne about Zapffe,
Yeah.
which I don't think got nearly enough attention. How did that opportunity come about, and what was their reaction to it? Yeah, I'd love to hear about that whole thing. Yeah.
Yes, I became aware of the society, and given my interest in existentialism, I thought, well, get involved and see what they do. I know a lot of it used to be face to face, and after the pandemic and the lockdowns, it all went online to Zoom meetings. So that's continued on, and so it's through Meetup. I think it's that sort of app, and so I sent an email to the organizer, just planting the seed of the idea of, let's have a look at an existentialist from Norway, Peter Wetzel Zapffe, and I shared the essay, and he said, yeah, let's do it. So yeah, a gap came up, and he said, look, we've got this date available. Are you still interested? I said, yeah, for sure. So I thought the best way to introduce Zapf's existentialism was to read out The Last Messiah, and then just have discussion after that. That was a fairly good turnout, and there was some interesting discussion. Some of it went a bit off topic at times, and some people's anchors, as Zapffe would define them, started coming in, like just some people that focused on, beliefs in the afterlife and God and stuff like that. So I think some people found it a bit threatening or challenging in some ways, and then I think that group in particular, there seems to be a lot of focus on religion. So clearly that's one response to our existential situation. There's a lot of talk about religion. And clearly Zapffe sort of identified that as an anchor and even as a distraction or, to help people cope with the tragic. So I think it was a good opportunity to have that discussion and talk about Zapffe in Australia, which I don't think, there's been much exposure here. Although I did get to meet, someone else at David Bennett at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas who was familiar with Zapffe as well. But I think it's just good exposure to start thinking about that. And because a lot of people, they think about the typical sort of European existentialists, like Heidegger and Camus and Sartre, people like that. So it's good to bring Zapffe in. And then also, obviously, anti-natalism, get that discussion happening as well. So it did get a little bit of discussion around that topic too, anti-natalism.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put the link to that video below, and I really, really hope to see you do like more of this kind of thing in the future. I mean, I hope you don't mind me asking this, but like, do you have any interest in eventually like moving into like, more of a study of Zapffe academically, or like existential philosophy academically? Do you think you would go that route? Because you've gone so far, becoming like, like an armchair expert on so many of these subjects. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess these days, like having been to university and gone through that, I'm fairly critical of the whole university system, and I don't think we need to go down that pathway to research or to study somebody. I don't know if that helps people get more. I guess if you're publishing books and articles, it probably helps. But there's obviously other antinatalists out there who don't have that background in academia who've published books. Sarah Perry, Jim Crawford, people like that. So I don't think it's necessary. And then obviously Ramesh Mishra, he's Ken Coates. I guess he studied in a different area, which was I think was engineering, but he wasn't an expert in antinatalism, but he still wrote a pretty good book. But I think obviously academic training can help in terms of the way you do research, and that certainly can be helpful. But I think it'd be limiting as well, particularly the way universities are going. They're sort of almost the way I see it is they're sort of almost like critically thought themselves out of existence by now. They're essentially a capitalist institution where learning has been commodified. So I think certain ideas, dangerous ideas, they're not too keen on it. I don't know. So I don't think I'd head in that direction. I'm just open to continuing to learn and find other people's thoughts and just do my own research, have conversations, and
Yeah, that's excellent. No, I mean, well, whatever background people have, or whatever they want to move in towards, or move towards, or not. I think the sentiment that you just laid out, let nothing stop you. Just keep on producing, no matter what, because those things should never stop a person. But anyway, I just was curious as to what your thoughts were on that. So thank you. I want to talk a little bit briefly about the Anti-natalism magazine. You brought it up
Ah.
just a bit. So I have all 4 issues. Really hard to get these now, sadly, unfortunately. So before we get into it, just for those that don't know, Anti-natalism magazine was originally a project that was begun by the late great Jun Hung, who is most well known now for his paper. It is why it is always better to cease to exist, which is like a sort of a seminal work on promortalism. He was behind issue number 1. He was the one that produced issue number 1, and then later on the project was taken over by our friend Andreas Moss. You were actively involved in all 4 issues. There's articles in all 4 issues about you. And it's really a shame that I know there's PDF versions of all 4 of these kind of floating around, but it's really a shame people don't have more access to these, because these were like some of the contributions that you made in these. I think are incredibly important, and it's a shame that people don't have more access to learning about you through these. Speaking about just issue 1 really briefly, this I think is the only one that's still available on Amazon. If it is, I'll put the link below. Did you have any like interaction with Chwoon when this issue was being produced?
I think, there may have been some early interactions just through Facebook. I think I had some couple of conversations with him early on, but nothing in great detail. I didn't know the influence he had until that particular magazine was published, and I did obviously get his book once I found out a little bit more as well. So unfortunately, I didn't get to talk with him much. Yeah, so it would have been good if I did, have some more time there to chat with him and find out more.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I'm always curious as to who knew him, who had interactions with him. For those that don't know, he was he only lasted. He died after a year. He killed himself after a year, but he was a much beloved, very young anti-natalist who did amazing things in his short time. But yeah, so there's an interview here with you in issue 1. It's an abbreviated form of the interview, if I'm not mistaken. And then later that interview in full would be published in issue 2. And I just want to point out like some of these incredible, I'll have to scan these maybe and put them into the video, but these incredible photos of you doing street activism. I mean, we talked about animal liberation. I assume some of these are from when you were running your campaign, right?
Yeah, so I was involved, in a bit of activism there for a while, protests and organizing. So that was a pretty intense time. Very active time. Yeah.
Well, if anybody, of all of the issues, they're all amazing. Like I highly recommend people try to pick up all 4 of them. This one, I think, like in some respects, gives the widest spectrum of like the antenatal world. And your interview is like a real incredible highlight of that. In issue 3, which has our friend Juwoon on the cover there, this is another incredible issue. But you talk about, and some more incredible photographs coming up. You talk about the incredible Zapffe pilgrimage that you made, I believe, with Andreas, right? You traveled with him.
Yeah, he shared part of that with me. Yeah.
That's
and also my sister was involved in some of that as well. Traveled to Norway with my sister. Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about that trip, about seeing Zapp's home and all these wonderful photos?
That was something Andreas and I talked about. Was something I wanted to do, just to sort of try and make a bit of more of a personal connection with Zapffe. So Andreas helped me with a few locations, and he wrote up a bit of a map for me, so some places we could visit. And in Andreas's local town in Tromsø, there's Zapfe's childhood home. There was a church that he climbed up to the spire there, and so we got to see those places. We got to go visit Zapfe's cabin, which was a bit of a distance away from Tromsø, where he wrote part of On the Tragic. And I also got to see his home where he lived with his wife up until the time he died in Oslo. Also his grave, got to visit he and his wife's grave, and also visit a museum in Asker. So they've made a replica of his study room in his home. So a lot of his belongings are there. So it was good to be able to just go there and see and touch, things that belong to him, and sort of try and make a bit more of a connection that way. So it was kind of a surreal experience for me and Andreas, just to sort of see those places and sort of think about Zapfe's impact and his life as well.
Yeah, what an incredible journey to have undertaken. Is there anywhere else like Zapffe related that you hope to travel to or see, in the future?
There was one place that I didn't really know about at that time, which is where he learned to rock climb just outside of Oslo, like a little cliff face. So I'd always thought that I'd want to go back and see that area as well, because I'm a rock climber myself. So I kind of be interested to sort of climb there and climb the climbs that he climbed. And I did get to climb the national mountain where he wrote an essay called On Stettin, the national mountain that he climbed as well. So I did get to climb that with my sister, which was a great experience as well. These days I'm sort of conflicted about travel. With the way climate change is going, it's sort of got to the point where it's hard to justify flying now. So I may have to sort of may never get back to Norway to see that area.
Yeah, I totally understand that. It is I could be way off, but that particular mountain that you're talking about, is that the one that he's like so famous for having drawn? Because he was a brilliant artist too. His drawings are just gorgeous.
He was.
Yeah.
I think there's a few drawings and paintings of Stettin. I seem to have obviously when you read the essay too, it had quite a profound impact on him, that particular mountain. And I guess in some ways nature was Zapfe's anchor. He took thousands of photographs, which is in Norway's national libraries, like 5,000 photos. A lot of them are taken in nature and connected to rock climbing the mountains. So I guess that was kind of his thing that gave him some kind of purpose and helped get him through.
Yeah, I've heard about that photo collection. Just incidentally, I hope that maybe like at some point there might be like a gallery show, of more of his photography, but also his drawings, because I really think he, his strength as a graphic artist is a bit understated, next to all of his other talents. That was one of the things I most enjoyed seeing in the photographs of, the recreation of his home, was like all of his drawing materials. And
well, there is an artist who recently published a book. Actually, he's a photographer, Marius Eriksson. It's a Norwegian book, but it's about Zapffe. So in that book. Actually, you mind if I grab it?
Yeah, please go ahead. I'd love to see it.
Grab it. It's not here, right? Yeah. So this book here.
Oh wow! Okay.
Recently published. It's by Marius Eriksson. So there's some photos in here, taken from that library, from the Zapfe's photo, and he also took a few of his own photos. So he sort of does a bit of comparison in the book, and talks about obviously the influence of Zapffe on him, and sort of basically through the photographs, seeing the world the way Zapffe saw it. So seeing things that Zapffe saw was just his way of connecting with Zapffe as well. So translation of that means like a storm wakes us from the slumber. Yes.
Brilliant. I'll have to get a hold of that. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's in Norwegian, but you can use Google Translate to read that and make sense of it. So definitely recommend that.
Good to
You
know. I won't have
contact me.
to kidnap Ryan to translate the
Yeah,
my more recent Zappa purchases
yeah.
for me. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can contact the author too. He has a website, Marius, so you can contact him there. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'll have to go check that out for sure. Thank you for the recommendation. That's amazing. I want to briefly just mention that you also were featured in issue 4. This is probably the rarest issue, by the way. It was
Mm.
only available for a very short period of time, but you had a very interesting conversation with Andrew McIntosh.
Yeah, so yeah, there was it's quite a bit of a long sort of I guess debate back and forth between us, and obviously him sort of you know basically saying yeah, no point doing activism, and me trying to argue for the point that there is, and basically saying that if it weren't for activism, how would people even know about antinatalism? And I guess people's idea of activism too can be pretty broad. Like some people think, it's out there on the streets, holding signs, doing outreach, but it's things like, making magazines, podcasts, publishing books, all that kind of stuff is a type of activism. And yeah, I guess, we can see that the interest in antinatalism has changed. So to me, that sort of is evidence that, activism is a good thing and that it's useful. Yeah.
Well, obviously, I fall far more on the side of your side of the argument.
Yeah.
But I really want to say, I mean, like, I felt that exchange was really valuable, if for no other reason than, well, for lots of reasons, but I mean, I think taking it out of the internet realm, not having it in video form, having it in text form, was really valuable because I've had my own disagreements with
Yeah.
Andrew,
Yeah.
and they don't typically get anywhere. But I think like having it in text and it just sort of being outside of that realm of the internet bullshit that is
Yeah.
so easy to get kind of wrapped up in. It was a valuable exchange, even if you weren't able to convince one another. Just the
Yeah.
sort of like laying out of your idea, both of your ideas, in such a way was great. I would love
Yeah.
to see more of that, I guess is my final
Yeah.
thoughts on that. Yeah.
Well, I did like that format, like you do get time to think more, and respond, put more thought into your responses. So I think that is a good way of having those kinds of debates. People get to read them and think about themselves rather than just sort of listening. You go, oh, I missed that, and have to go back and listen to that again. Or so, yeah, I think yeah, Andreas did a good job there, sort of having those kinds of debates. Yeah,
Well, once again, I think that this was a really important project. I think your contribution to all 4 issues was really invaluable. I do hope to see this project or something like it brought back in the future. I think it gave something to antinatalism that's really been missing, and should a project of that sort come back around, I hope that you will also make further contributions. Because I think it was a good platform for you. You know what I mean? The magazine. So yes, thank you for your contributions to that.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's right. Yeah, I think the good thing about those magazines is it sort of connected people in a community, and and I know you've been involved in setting up antinatalist organizations, and there's a few others out there now too. I think that's another way to bring people together in terms of a community, and I think Ramesh Mishra talked about that in his book too. Like we talk a lot about. Um, Activism, but he talked about the sociology of that. What does that mean? And I think it sounds like with your PhD, you're planning on doing some research around that particular topic, community and stuff like that. So, like I know for me, I like joining organizations and being member and supporting it that way financially and just coming together as like a greater group and where people can share ideas. And I think, like newsletters, articles, journals, all that kind of stuff fits well into those kind of things. But as you know, all this takes a lot of work. And So yeah, someone's got to have the time and obviously the motivation to do projects like that. Yeah,
An unbelievable amount of work. And also, I
mm,
will say, I mean, I think you bring up an important point that even though I hope to get another opportunity to do an antinatalist organization in the future, I definitely encourage people to make them, and there have been a couple since, like antinatalist advocacy, you know, of Lawrence Anton and John Williams fame. Um, but I think that when it starts to get, that's the point at which antinatalist activism and the problems in the community start to get start to really bump heads, because all of those disagreements, you know, veganism, non-veganism, extinctionism, non-extinctionism, antinatalism, ethylism, all of these different things that start to get that just bubble, you know,
mm,
below the surface. All of that gets very irritated and agitated and activated once
yeah,
it starts to move into the realm of like real organization and activism. And I think that antinatalism has very unique difficulties in moving towards that. And I think those elements have been really the crux of what's defeated a lot of those efforts so
mm,
far, is that they're just difficult storms to weather, and
mm,
they sort of uh, hobble those efforts. And I hope that antinatalist activism will be able to move past that, but they are such unique difficulties. I'm not sure
mm,
how. Do you have
mm.
any thoughts on that? I don't know. You know.
Well, that's been my experience through all types of activism. You know, there's going to be people out there with different opinions, and yeah, that's what makes it tricky. You know, people got different ideas on strategy and tactics, and um, you know what supports what. You know what ideologies sort of complement or don't work together. So I think that's just human part of the human predicament is that the more of us there are, there's going to be more diversity of opinions, and um, yeah, we're not going to always agree. So that's what makes it sort of complex as well, um, and sometimes difficult and frustrating, and sometimes that feeds into burnout as well.
Well, do you have any thoughts, Tim, on you know, as somebody like me that's kind of seen the course of the last, you know, nearly 15 years of antinatalism, you know, move in the
Mm.
direction that it's moved. Where is it going? What does the future of antinatalism look like to your eyes?
Yeah, well, I think it's reached a point now where it's becoming a little more well known, and like uh, I know that particularly well from just the media that I read, that more women are choosing not to have children. It's becoming more acceptable. More men are choosing not to have children, and I know things like the environment, and conflict and wars in the world, climate change, all that sort of stuff, starting to make people think about the future and whether they really want to bring children into the world. So I think there is potential there for antinatalism to really start growing more. And I think same with veganism too, particularly plant-based diets or vegan diets, with the way breeding other animals is having a huge impact on the environments and climate change. Obviously, that's at some point probably nature will force a change there, and possibly the same with procreation. So I think it's really important that we have obviously access to things like contraception, safe abortion, things like that. And I think anti-natalists would be good too if they can get behind and support those organizations. Because the way I see it, like there's not going to be a huge uptake of antinatalism, but any birth we can prevent is a good thing. So if we can, help fund or support the supply of, safe abortion and contraception, vasectomies, that kind of stuff, I'd encourage any antinatalist to do that, get behind those organizations.
Yeah,
Mm,
I mirror those thoughts 100%. I mean, I think that there is some hesitance in antinatalism to support something that looks a little bit more child free or has those sort of like concerns that are a little bit more grounded in non-philosophy, let's say, just good old access to not having the tools that people need in order to not have children. But that reaching for that sort of antenatal purity is really not the point. Like, I hope that antinatalism can grow towards being a more positive voice towards people's reproductive freedom. You know what I mean? I mean, I think that's the choice not to have children, and providing people with the means to make that choice effectively. That's it. That's, every life prevented is important.
Yeah. And I guess the more attractive we can make, being child free, the more people are, going to choose to go down that path, and obviously that results in, more people not having children, even if they're not antinatalists. It still leads to the same outcome.
It's the same outcome, and normalizing that outcome is only going to lead to more of an interest in philosophical antinatalism. It's only going to make that conversation and the stuff that people really want, future antinatalists to pay attention to more on the surface.
Yeah. And like you say in your book, you're talking about the procreation Ponzi scheme. Like, if people can find other ways to find meaning and purpose in their life, that's going to open up other opportunities for them so that they don't go that pathway of having children. I know here in Australia, it's probably the same in the US. Like, the cost of living is having a huge impact on people's decisions as well. Having a child is quite expensive. So I think that will at least limit how many children people do have in the future, particularly if this, and I can't see the cost of living going away. Like, the way the economy is going, and the way the economy functions or dysfunctions, I think that's going to be a bigger issue as well in the future, in terms of people's choices.
Well, speaking of people's choices and what, I mean, I think this episode, by the time the next episode of Exploring Antinatalism comes out after this one, we will have our next USA president. And, there's some really scary implications to the kind of choices people may or may not have based on who wins that election. So we'll see. There's, we're at kind of a unique moment as far as.
Well, it's scary here in Australia too. We're seeing the impact of the US, going backwards on abortion in some of our states here. Like, there's recently in one of the states, politician created a bill to try and, at least eliminate late-term abortions. And then recently in another state, they've had politicians who basically say they'll go back to criminalizing abortion after it was decriminalized a few years ago. So I think whatever happens in the US can influence other places, even like Australia. So we need to make sure that we continue to focus on those rights.
100%.
People keep voting for people that support them, because unfortunately, one of those states has just voted for another conservative government who voted against decriminalizing abortion a few years ago. So, all these gains can be lost.
I think, I mean, complacency is the enemy, right? Like, too much is falling. I mean, the other element that's really scary, that I don't know. I don't know what potential it has to spread to other countries, but, I don't know if you're aware of what just happened in Russia, where they passed sort of like a, against child-free ideology,
child-free.
So, I mean, that could very well happen in other parts of the world, where all of a sudden it's illegal to talk about antinatalism. I mean, I don't know. So the future of there you go. So so I mean, the future of antinatalism is very uncertain, and I think people need to remember that. Well, on that charming note, I mean, what, we've talked about sort of what the future, in more general terms might look like for antinatalism, but what about for you individually, Tim? I mean, what are some projects, if any, that you have in mind What direction do you think you might want to go in? And what can people listening to this do to best support your efforts? Do you have anything you want to plug?
So in terms of going forward and the work I'm doing, like I wasn't sure whether I'd bring this up, but I do work in an area of nursing, sexual reproductive healthcare that is focused on people having that choice. So that is my focus. That is my, 4 days a week. That's what I'm doing. Ensuring people have access to safe abortion, contraception, vasectomy, that kind of thing. So that it's given me a bit of a mission and a purpose as well. Focus on that particular area. Yeah, for sure. And I think, what inspired me to work in that area too was like, having my own vasectomy about, 16 years ago now at the age of 30. I wanted to make sure that other people had that choice available to them. So I worked I was a psychiatric nurse for about 20 years. And about 3.5 years ago, I decided to make a change because I was making a donation to the organization I work for, and then I thought, well, it's time for a new job. So I looked up and found an opportunity there. So that's been a good change for me. Yeah.
You're doing some of the most important work possible. So good on you. It's not easy. I can't imagine some of the things that you've had to encounter. So I mean, thank you for helping the people that you have and for doing the work that you've done. My hat's off to you. Really inspiring. And
thank you, Amanda. And I have to say the same thing to you. Like, you've done some amazing work over the last 15 years. Planting the seed and your ongoing work, having these conversations with lots of different people. Some of them go on for several hours. So there's a lot of content there for people to think about and to get through. So the fact that you're still doing that is pretty amazing. So thank you for that too.
Thank you so much, Tim. That's really, really kind of you. Yeah, we're gonna one way or the other, we're gonna get to 100 episodes by the end of the year, and to another 100 more. I won't stop so long as I can keep going. So long as the forces of the world, don't make it impossible. I'll keep going. So thank you so much, and just thank you so much, Tim, for being my guest on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast.
Yeah, thanks again for the opportunity to finally have a good chat with you and be part of the podcast. It's like I said, it's amazing work, so it's really good to be part of that.
Hey everybody, it's Amanda. Are you looking for an excellent way of making academic antinatalist works more available across the globe? I know I am. And so I'm delighted to announce that the wonderful and award-winning Polish publishing house
Towarzystwo Naukowe imienia Stanisława Andreskiego,
which over the last few years has produced some exceptionally beautiful Polish editions of both original works like
Anti-natalism
by
Mikołaj Starzyński,
as well as classic academic antinatalist works like David Benatar's Better Never to Have Been, has now opened an online shop featuring the magnificent antinatalist Ouroboros designed by
Michał Dziadkowiec.
The logo is fully customizable and available on a wide variety of products. Proceeds from all sales at the shop go directly towards the translation, production, and publication of more Polish editions by
Towarzystwo Naukowe imienia Stanisława Andreskiego.
What a perfect way for the antinatalist community to help assist an amazing company doing such important work, making more antinatalist academic works more widely available. Link below.
Towarzystwo Naukowe imienia Stanisława Andreskiego.
The most dangerous idea in the world. That she will not have children. That he is not allowed to spread his sperm into outer space. Is not a bioethicist who questions the value of human life itself like a physicist who denies the existence of cause and effect, or a theologian who denies the existence of God?
In his recent essay, Bioethics and the Value of Human Life, philosopher and bioethicist Matti Haira answers this question. Absolutely, definitely, maybe. He also distinguishes between bioethics with and without a hyphen, bio-utilitarian thanatos ethics, and a newcomer among ethical theories of value, oib ethics. You heard that right. Bioethics spelled backwards. Bioethics and the Value of Human Life by Matti Haira on the Cambridge Quarterly of Healthcare Ethics. Out now, totally free, open access. Go check it out. Thank you for listening to the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast. Please follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Exploring Antinatalism can also be heard on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Amazon.com, and so many other platforms. You can email me at exploringantinatalism@gmail.com. Website designed by Visions Noirs. Please follow him at www.bionoir.com and follow him on Instagram. Logo art by Life Sucks. Please subscribe to him on YouTube and check out his shop on Etsy at www.etsy.com/shop/lifesuckspublishing. Music by Matti Haira. You can hear the whole song, Life is a Sexually Transmitted Disease with a Mortality Rate of 100%, by following the link in the description, and make sure to also read his academic paper which inspired the song. If you must give them a gift, then give them the gift of non-existence, in the Cambridge Quarterly of Healthcare Ethics on cambridge.org. Links below. All the best, and bye for now.
Life is no thrill compared to nil. Life is no thrill. It's worse than nil. So draw the right conclusion. Let them be still.